to come up against Paul on the other side, but he's also going to be confident in what he's done already. A 4-0 is a really impressive start to the day. You just got to keep that moving through one more really difficult opponent.
All right, so let's see what happens here. Round 5 of the Louisville Regional Championships. Joey Woodring on the top of your screen. Arch Aladon Pelipper setting that rain core right from the start, compared to Paul Chua on the bottom of your screen with Incineroar and Amoonguss.
Yeah. Interesting here, Joey immediately decisive about going into the rain mode, threatening quite a bit of damage. This could be Stellar Terra Hurricane coming in from the other side. Meanwhile, Paul a little bit more passive, brings in 2 of his pivoting options, doesn't really show exactly what offense he's threatening. Can try to get a Spore off or Parting Shot into something, but definitely a different pace set by each player right here from the beginning.
And as you mentioned during Team Preview, Len, it's not necessarily safe. Just because you have the rain up, you want to click Electro Shot, have that 2-turn move activate in 1 turn. It's not safe to do so because Paul potentially could have a Alolan Ninetales in the back, which would set up the Hail and turn Electro Shot back into a 2-turn move. But for now, on this turn, Joey will just swap his Pelipper out, anticipating something to switch on Paul's end. So Incineroar will intimidate both of Paul's Pokemon. The fake out goes to Incineroar on the swap, so that is huge because Incineroar is not attacking anyway, and Joey does get to activate the Electro Shot.
Successfully gets the Electro Shot off, no Ninetales coming in. Pelipper dodges losing its Focus Sash and goes out to the Incineroar. Pretty strong turn so far for Joey.
So that's a +1 special attack boost to Joey's Arch Aladon, but it does get put to sleep as this Amoonguss was not threatened whatsoever, and Arch Aladon has to stay asleep next turn.
So Joey catches one thing with the Incineroar switch in, but I'm sure he would have rather had the Spore go into the safety goggles as Incineroar came in. Instead, it is Arch Aladon falling asleep after getting the boost. Not still a terrible position here. The Arch Aladon isn't really threatened by either of these Pokemon. It is a position where you could just spend a couple of turns trying to wake up. That means Paul needs to be the one to kind of change the position and find a way to start threatening these things and move through the game.
Joey fake outs the opposing Incineroar on the other end, so that will stop a potential Parting Shot or anything from Paul this turn. But this does allow Amoonguss to just Pollen Puff up his Incineroar on his side. It's going to end up incredibly healthy at this point. It's almost like Incineroar hasn't taken any damage.
Incineroar back to full health. If it can get a Parting Shot onto Arch Aladon, that'll undo the Electro Shot in the other way as well. But unlike the power or the Arch Aladon we saw in the last round, this one can continue to just keep using Electro Shot. And so it's harder to keep up with the damage reduction and the special attack reduction if it can get woken up. But for this turn, Arch Aladon's staying asleep.
That will be the 2nd turn of sleep for Arch Aladon. Knockoff from Joey's Incineroar will knock off that Citrus Berry, meaning Amoonguss won't recover any HP when it drops below 50% HP. The Parting Shot does land into Arch Aladon this time around, lowering Arch Aladon's attack and special attack by 1 stage, bringing that special attack back down to neutral. And, you know, there's only the 5 turns of rain, so the longer this goes, the more turns Joey has to spend trying to wake up. Eventually, rain will stop, and Pelipper will have to come back in to reset it.
Luckily, Pelipper is there, ready to do that. Still has Focus Sash intact. Dragonite comes in a pretty strong position here, though. Already has the Intimidate and Fake Out gone from the other side, which sets up the multi-scale really well here. Of course, that just may incentivize Joey to get Incineroar off the field sooner to come in and try to be threatening the Dragonite that way. And then Dragonite not really threatened by the Arch Aladon as much on the other side because it is still get multi-scale intact and has the special attack dropped already. So this is not the same kind of risky position it might be otherwise for Dragonite up against Arch Aladon.
And if you've been watching VGC for the past couple of seasons, anticipating a Choice Band, Inner Focus, Terra Normal, Extreme Speed Dragonite, that's not what Paul Chua's set is. It's Lumberry with a multi-scale, kind of a middling ground decision for this Dragonite, but as Len mentioned, won't be intimidated on this turn. Incineroar does swap into the Amoonguss position, so Paul still has not revealed that 4th Pokemon to Joey, crucially here in this game 1. Low Kick goes into Arch Aladon, which will give it a stamina boost to its defense here, but Joey getting all 3 turns of sleep on his Arch Aladon, really disastrous. Wanted to wake up and get a boost again from the Electro Shot, won't get that, and this Incineroar will Parting Shot out to safety.
Arch Aladon gets the full sleep. The Dragonite gets pretty valuable damage into Arch Aladon, but things still look like they might be headed in Joey's favor. Gets the Incineroar back off the field after dropping Dragonite's attack 1 stage. That means, of course, that Incineroar can come in and reduce Dragonite's attack even further. Arch Aladon has gotten a defense boost. So that while that first low kick looked really big, a second low kick might actually look very small, which is going to put the onus for something else to do the damage to Archaludon, but that's not going to be Incineroar and Amoonguss either. So going to be down to most likely Paul's 4th Pokemon to find a way to start getting through this Archaludon, unless Dragonite can get out, get away from attack boost, and then kind of reset that way.
And at least at that point, if on Paul's end, if he can get the Archaludon low enough, even with all the special, or excuse me, the defense boost from Stamina, if you hit it with, say, a special attacker that's really fast, you'd be able to chip it down and get the KO.
Meanwhile, Archaludon's damage is unlocked. It cannot sleep through one more turn. The Dragonite is looking a little bit more vulnerable now.
Dragonite does swap here for Paul, so we'll be into the Amoonguss or that 4th to be revealed Pokemon. We have the benefit of knowing it is a Alolan Ninetales, but Joey does not have that information revealed yet. Archaludon finally waking up, as it is guaranteed to do so. Does not click Electro Shot. Instead, will Dragon Pulse into the Amoonguss switch in. There's the Ice Beam follow-up. Super effective for the KO. Critical hit. Amoonguss is down.
Probably a critical hit that mattered. Joey there, probably not reading Amoonguss coming in, but just searching for the damage against Dragonite. Dragon Pulse plus Ice Beam would have been enough to pick up the KO on Dragonite. Instead, with the critical hit, it's enough damage to pick up the KO on Amoonguss. And that starts to simplify the game in Joey's favor. One less tool to be pivoting around, getting out of these Intimidates, trying to win the Weather War. There's a lot of reasons that Paul wants to switch in and out, and that's harder to do when you're down to 3 Pokemon. In a lot of these matchups that are going to go slowly, have so much pivoting, the first person to lose a Pokemon is at such a big disadvantage. And in this case, Joey's done it at pretty low cost. It's not like massive damage has built up on Joey's side of the field. It's just that 40% to Archaludon and a bunch of turns spent sleeping, but that's all in the past now.
I do wonder on Joey's end, which do you value more? Do you value the Intimidate on a potential Incineroar switch in onto this multi-scale Dragonite so it does less damage? Or do you get the Rain from Pelipper on the switch in to immediately activate the Electro Shot?
I think that's a really difficult decision as well, right? Because even if Pelipper comes in and gets the Rain, you might still take a Blizzard that's going to do a lot of damage to Pelipper. It wouldn't be that surprising if then Dragonite also is going out on the offense if you just lost Pelipper on that turn, which could, maybe that's okay because Amoonguss is now gone. You don't have to try to preserve it to make sure you can get a Hurricane in the future, and so it's something you can be more risky with. But Incineroar, always something that's really easy to just switch in. You don't care as much about its health bar, and it will take these attacks pretty well.
Right, and it resists the Blizzard crucially here from this Alolan Ninetales. That's choice specs damage into the Incineroar, not doing a lot. Archaludon takes that pretty well, of course. Low kick follow-up, though, because of the prior stamina boost, it will be able to hang on in the red, just barely, and can respond with the Flash Cannon. No Focus Sash on Ninetales. That's a one-hit KO.
Really a crucial turn. It took the Intimidate, it took the 2 stamina boosts, one from the low kick and one from the Blizzard, to make sure that that relatively low base power low kick into Archaludon isn't enough damage to pick up the KO and gets the really important Flash Cannon, because now it's further simplified. Paul down to just 2 Pokemon. There is no pivoting left. And Paul sees the writing on the wall with no pivoting left. Has to just concede this game. Dragonite was going to get its attack stats slowly whittled down, and Porygon 2 was going to be so difficult to deal with. If you're getting these 2 Pokemon intimidated a bunch, then how do you ever deal with the Porygon 2? It's just, an Ice Beam or 2 away from starting to clean the game up.
Yeah, I mean, Joey is able to endure the 3 turns of sleep. A lot of the times that might be very difficult for you if your most important Pokemon is staying asleep and not doing damage every turn. However, as you mentioned, Len, it was an Incineroar and a Amoonguss on the other side. It's not necessarily like the Archaludon was really that threatened while it was sleeping.
Yeah, I think that was the problem. Paul really never presented the offense against the Archaludon. It was a very passive opening. Let Incineroar and Amoonguss spend a lot of time with mostly Incineroar and Amoonguss on the field. And I don't think we can have a repeat of that in Game 2. Paul's going to need to find some adjustment to deal with this Archaludon more quickly. And the challenging thing is, with the adjustment in Ninetales to not have the Focus Sash, while the choice specs can threaten a ton of damage from a Blizzard, it is still an AV. You're not going to one-hit KO this Archaludon, or even clean it up after the low kick like we saw in the previous game. And with no Focus Sash, you're always one Flash Cannon away from just losing the Ninetales. Maybe if the Terastallization is spent on Ninetales instead to try to make sure that you get 2 attacks off, you can keep up with the damage trading against Archaludon Archaladon a little bit better, but I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe Garchomp come in as another big damage threat against Archaladon. You know, even if you've given up a stamina boost, Life Orb Stomping Tantrum is still going to do so much damage to Archaladon.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with Alolan Ninetales that's kind of held it back, that Ice Fairy typing, which is great offensively because you hit a lot of things really strongly with Moonblast and Blizzard, is really tough defensively as a 4 times weak to steel attacks from this Archaladon with Flash Cannon. I think if you were to Terrasilize it into the Ghost typing, one, you block the Fake Out from potential Incineroar on the other end, but also this relatively frail Pokemon is now able to endure a Flash Cannon instead of just being, you know, taking about 600% from her or whatever it would actually take.
Yeah, might still have to watch out for an Electro Shot. I don't know that, Cal, but it could do a chunk of damage. I think the other sneaky thing to watch out here that's a problem for Paul is just the Porygon 2 using Ice Beam. You know, that game we saw it pick up a KO against Amoonguss. If that game had been played out instead of conceded, it would have eventually Ice Beamed the Dragonite. And if the adjustment you're looking at is something like Garchomp, well, that's another Ice Beam target. And it's, again, with damage mitigation coming in, like Intimidate from Incineroar, it's hard to deal with the Porygon 2 fast enough to not have to give up a couple of Ice Beams.
And that's the beauty of Terrasilization. If you say, okay, well, Amoonguss is very much threatened by Ice Beam, all right, well, I'll Terrasilize into a Water type. Well, now you're weak to Electro Shot, right? So it feels like Joey has Amoonguss's name kind of in this matchup. We'll see how it plays out in Game 2, if Paul Chua can force a Game 3, or if Joey will win 2-0 for his first time on stream.
We get the adjustment from Paul that I asked for. Garchomp's on the field and is immediately in its worst case scenario. This is probably why Paul didn't want to bring it in Game 1, because it immediately gets intimidated. Is facing an Ice Beam from the Porygon on the other side, can threaten a bunch of damage into that Incineroar, but that could also just be a Pelipper at any moment. And so yeah, a rough start for Garchomp here.
Garchomp is Terra Steel on Paul Chua's end compared to some of those Terra Ground versions, that variants that do a little bit more damage. Wants the defensive option of going from 4 times weak on Ice Beam to resisting it as a Steel type. But the Amoonguss will swap in. Fake Out doesn't go into the Amoonguss slot. Instead, it will hit Paul Chua's Incineroar, meaning no attacks from Paul this turn, and Joey successfully setting up Trick Room. However, Amoonguss is the slowest Pokemon on the field, so for these Twisted Dimensions, Amoonguss, those spores are going to move first.
Yeah, Garchomp escapes, gets us back to this relatively passive position with Amoonguss and Incineroar, but a position that feels a lot less passive when Trick Room is up and Amoonguss is going to be the first thing moving. Also feels less passive when Joey's Safety Goggles is already on the field. You don't have to worry about the Safety Goggles ending up in the Porygon 2 slot. You don't have to worry about the Porygon 2 protecting itself. The only way that Spore isn't going to land is if it's Amoonguss coming back into that slot.
So with the Porygon and Incineroar on Joey's end, Incineroar at least is protected from Spore thanks to its Safety Goggles held item. However, Porygon 2 is not. That Eviolate does not keep you from being put to sleep, meaning Joey will have to take this first turn of sleep on Porygon here. Paul is able to Parting Shot the opposing Incineroar on the other end. We'll see if Joey is just going to follow suit as well, as that's pretty much always the best switching move. And we know that 4th Pokemon have the advantage of seeing on Paul's end is that Alolan Ninetales for later. You know, potentially once Trick Room expires, you bring it back out and it's a super fast Pokemon.
Absolutely, and it would have felt pretty necessary for beating the Archaladon, right? It did a bunch of the damage. The last time, you can imagine if you're, you know, plan A is a Garchomp attack, you have to worry about a Grass Terrasilization, so Ninetales can help clean that up. But that might just show the value of Joey's kind of split team here, right? If this isn't even Archaladon at all, and so many of Paul's decisions in Team Preview were based around trying to beat Archaladon, and instead you're just fighting Porygon 2 and Ursaluna for a big chunk of this game, then it's going to feel a lot worse, those decisions.
Now you have to know your enemy, and if you're so focused on Archaladon, or your opponent's so focused on it, then maybe you just don't even bring it to the matchup. But Porygon 2 wakes up on this turn with an Ice Beam. No critical hit this time. It will do a little bit less damage. Here is the Parting Shot from Joey's Incineroar, lowering the attack of Garchomp on the switch in here.
Porygon 2 could have just had an Ice Beam into Garchomp on that turn, but based on the targeting, you can see Joey's thoughts. This Spore is a problem while you're in Trick Room, and just trying to get damage onto Amoonguss is really valuable. And meanwhile, Garchomp, especially if you get the Parting Shot into it, isn't too huge of a damage threat, but it actually is still the Archaladon. Even with Trick Room going up, Archaladon is coming out of the back into what was already an Incineroar, so that Stomping Tantrum is going to do a lot of damage. Thanks to the Intimidate, it's not, or the Parting Shot is not looking like a 2-hit KO, but Still not a bad turn for Paul.
Yeah, that is a lot of damage considering the Archaludon. It didn't get set up yet. That's only one stamina boost to it. So you'd imagine you follow up with the Stomping Tantrum on the next turn. You're going to bring Archaludon down very low. And this is different than the last set we saw with, Life Dew and Hospitality as well to bring that health up. This Archaludon, if it gets low, it's staying low.
Yeah, there's Pollen Puff, could be the fourth Pokemon. That's the Pollen Puff from Amoonguss. If Amoonguss were the fourth Pokemon, is the only way that Archaludon could heal. In the meantime, the Amoonguss is a pretty dangerous threat here. Well, moving first could spore either of these slots, but unlike the last time when the spore successfully landed into Porygon, now Incineroar is lurking in the back. That safety goggles could come in into either slot, block a spore, and intimidate Garchomp again. So Paul rather just to get the Regenerator, get Amoonguss back, and not try to play a guessing game of where it's safe to spore right now.
Yeah, that's what makes Paul such a great player. He doesn't want to opt into those mind games of where does Incineroar come onto the field. If I try to spore one of the slots, and the answer is Incineroar also could not switch in sometimes, which is how Joey plays this turn out. Garchomp will protect itself from this Porygon 2 Ice Beam. That would have been disastrous to take that 4-time super effective attack, so you will be fine. Dragon Pulse from Archaludon into Incineroar does hardly any damage.
Really so little damage into the Incineroar on the other side. Paul doesn't mind that turn. Now has Fake Out pressure, could try to get Garchomp through a turn here, but of course Garchomp just so threatened by Ice Beam and Dragon Pulse on the other side.
See that the Alolan Ninetales is the fourth Pokemon. Paul trying to decide when is the perfect time to break that out. Archaludon is already down to just a little bit over 50% HP remaining, but this Porygon 2 is still at full HP, so even if Trick Room expires, if you don't deal with the Porygon 2, you can just reset up the Trick Room again. Yeah,
it's looking like Porygon 2 will just be at full health when this Trick Room expires. Paul could try to make a play to get a Amoonguss on the field. Spore is one way to prevent Trick Room because of its negative priority. You could also try to get the Ninetales on the field to be threatening damage as Trick Room expires, but for now, Porygon 2 just out into the back. Incineroar is going to come in, get a pretty valuable Intimidate into both of these Pokemon.
Yeah, Paul has two physical attackers on the field right now, so according to Joey's calculations, you just swap Incineroar in to intimidate both of those Pokemon, lowering their attack by one stage. Now the Garchomp will swap into Amoonguss. Amoonguss is even healthier now than it was thanks to that Regenerator ability, helping it recover HP when it's swapped out. Paul Chua with the technically double swap after this parting shot will connect, and he can bring his Garchomp back in safely to the other slots. The only attack this turn is going to be from an Archaludon. We did see click Dragon Pulse last time around, but instead it's Body Press into a Poison type for no damage.
Really strong turn from Paul there to reposition this field into a pretty big damage threat. Garchomp shifts from the right to the left, but also dodges -2 attack in the meantime. Of course, the fake out pressure from Joe is pretty meaningful here. You have to worry about fake out into Garchomp plus Dragon Pulse, right? It's not so easy to go out on the offense. Of course, Amoonguss has to worry that it could take a Flare Blitz from the other side, might be low enough to make that a serious threat. So a little bit of a volatile position here. Neither player probably has a perfectly safe move, and so you have to think about what risks you will accept, what Pokemon are maybe more disposable than others. Of course, Joey also still has that Porygon 2 at full health in the back. Really hard to see how that doesn't get a Trick Room when it wants to get a Trick Room, unless it's the Amoonguss suppressing it.
Incineroar on Joey's end will swap out here into the Pelipper. Joey revealing Pelipper was the fourth Pokemon, and that was one thing I think really fascinating about this game was that Joey was waiting so long, as Paul has still not revealed the Alolan Ninetales, to reveal that Weather Setter, but Joey thinks it's the perfect time now as he can terrestrialize his Archaludon into a Grass type, make it immune to the Spore on Amoonguss's end, and with the rain, you do have access to the Electro Shot being one turn now. Stomping Tantrum misses on the Pelipper as a flying type, does no damage. Dragon Pulse, though, brings Garchomp down to 8 HP, and the Spore will not hit into the newly found Grass type Archaludon.
Very strong defensive turn from Joey there, dodges the attacks all over. That could have been a Spore into Pelipper. It could have been a bunch of damage into Archaludon, but maybe also fell for Paul's bait here. Like you mentioned, Paul has been waiting so long to show that fourth Pokemon, and it is the Ninetales. And so now that Archaludon has gone Grass type, it's weak to Blizzard out of the back. The rain has been set. I'm not sure Paul would have hated if Garchomp just went down there to give Ninetales a free way in. Instead, Garchomp's going to need to attack for turn, KO itself with Life Orb. But yeah, the Terrestrialization being being spent to create an ice weakness could come back and hurt Joey in the long run. But of course, Porygon 2, Incineroar a little bit less threatened by Blizzard.
All right, Paul will bring Incineroar onto the Amoonguss position there. This 8 HP Garchomp probably not going to be able to stick around more than this turn since you get target down. So might as well go for a Dragon Claw on the way out, breaking Pelipper's Focus Sash. Go out on your own turns from your own Life Orb on the Garchomp, taking that 10% recoil, meaning this Hurricane has to hit into Incineroar, bringing it down pretty low there, but this is a resisted Flash Cannon, so Incineroar hangs on in the red.
I think Paul gets away with one there. Incineroar could have easily gone down to maybe even Dragon Pulse, but definitely to body press alongside that Hurricane. But Joey fishing for Ninetales to be coming into that slot and probably didn't trust that body press plus Hurricane could pick up the KO or Hurricane could miss. And so instead Incineroar stays around. That could be pretty important because it gives those pivoting options stay there. As soon as you're down to 2 Pokemon on a team like Paul's, is so much more difficult to play. And now Ninetales has found its way onto the field. It's threatening so much damage against both of these Pokemon. The Focus Sash being broken really means that Pelipper needs to flee out to the back. It also needs to try to regain control of the weather. Both Pokemon in the back don't mind taking this Blizzard though. I think that's going to be the key to Paul's strategy here. Is like these two that are in front of you, these are vulnerable to Blizzard. It's clear how you beat these Pokemon. But where do you ever find the damage against the Porygon 2, against the Incineroar, especially once you lock into a move with Ninetales? If it does lock into an Ice move, it's not going to be able to just go into Moonblast instead and start dealing with this Incineroar that way. Incineroar
swaps into the Pelipper slot, so Joey will be able to save that Pelipper for later, swapping it back in and setting up the rain. Archaudon actually switching out, giving up those stamina boosts just for the safety, because you know you're not going to be able to handle a Choice Specs Blizzard as a grass type Archaudon. Incineroar swapping out on Paul's end, a very defensive set between Paul and Joey here. Don't want to make any bad decisions, just going to swap out. It will be Freeze Dry as the Choice Specs attack for Alolan Ninetales. Doesn't get a freeze onto the P2.
You can see how little damage that is, even with Choice Specs just barely pinging that Porygon 2. And so it's so unclear where the damage comes from. Amoonguss and Incineroar are not known for their damage. I think another way to look at these kinds of slow pivoting defensive games is just to compare the Incineroar's health, to see who's ahead, who has more Incineroar pivots left in the tank, and this time the discrepancy is huge. Paul's Incineroar are going to go down to probably the next thing that touches it. Joey still looks so healthy, like it's going to just 1v3 the rest of these Pokemon if given the chance.
Right, and it's you know, pretty much it's full HP there. There's a grass type on the other end. There's an ice type as well as a fire type Incineroar. So Joey's not really threatened too much, or at all, I should say, from any type of super effective damage remaining on Paul's side. That Flare Blitz will go into the Amoonguss, doing a lot of damage. Terra Blast from Porygon, a normal type that likes using Terra Blast even without Terastallizing, picks up the KO, and Paul down to his last 2 Pokemon. That means Ninetales has to come in. This Pollen Puff is going to fail also, so it doesn't even heal up his teammate. Ninetales has to switch in here, which means Joey permanently wins the weather battle.
Well, we talked about Incineroar health as a measuring stick between 2 teams in a match like this. Paul saw one way to try to catch back up, at least in that measuring stick. Went for the Pollen Puff, but doesn't get it. And you can see how far ahead Joey was because of the bad position Ninetales was in. It wasn't a threat at all. Joey didn't have to respect its offense, which meant that he had the damage to threaten the KO in either slot. If that had been Flare Blitz plus Ice Beam, Amoonguss would have just gone down. You don't have to worry about Spore, you don't have to worry about Pollen Puff that way. Instead, it's the Terra Blast into the other slot, picks up a KO there, but things will just continue to simplify from here. Now the pivoting is done. The Amoonguss is not going to get regenerated. There's no more Intimidates. There's no more Weather War, so Paul is finished. And Joey really impressively takes a 2-0 match win against Paul.
Yeah, first time on stream against a 6-time regional champion, international champion, multi-world's top cut player in Paul Chua. No problem for Joey Woodring. Impressive 2-0 victory there. Also takes a very courageous play to swap your somewhat set up Archaudon out. Had a couple of stamina boosts to it, but understanding, okay, Archaudon's not going to be the reason I win this game. It will be the Porygon and Incineroar that will help me win this.
I think it was just a really patiently played game from Joey as well. You know, in game 1, led the Archaudon, kind of played the